Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land. In this video we're looking at another book haul. This time I have 6 modern classics for you to consider. So without further ado, let's get stuck in, shall we? The first book in my book haul for this month is John Steinbeck's Cannery Row. Now, I don't know if you've read any Steinbeck before. I've read a little, not lots, but he's got a very vivid and direct style of writing, which I really enjoy. I think one of the things I thought when I first came across Steinbeck was atmosphere. He's really got an ability, almost like Hemingway, to just drum up a sense of place. Now, the premise to Cannery Row is quite straightforward, and I'm looking forward to going through it. It's set in California, I think it's Monterey, on a street of sardine canneries, hence the phrase Cannery Row. And it follows a very basic plot. There is a marine biologist who is good to everybody, called Doc because of being a marine biologist. And Mag, the leader of sort of a disparate group of people, decides to hold a party for Doc because Doc seems to help people without wanting anything in return. But the party goes horribly wrong and ruins Doc's lab and house. So obviously it doesn't have the desired outcome. But Mac and the community decide to try again. Now, will they redeem themselves, or will it make matters even worse? I don't know, because I haven't read this. What I do know about this is it does what Steinbeck is very good at. And that is, I've mentioned atmosphere. When it comes to his characters, he captures their essence, an aura, as it were. And it takes in a bunch of vignettes of different characters in the neighbourhood, like Lee Chong's Heavenly Flower Grocery, I think it's called, and Dora's Bordello. And it just follows their lives as small subplots to the larger plot of the novella. I think you could call this a novella. I asked in a previous video how you felt about me reading the opening paragraph to the books that I talk about, and I got an overwhelming response of yes, please read it. I understand some would like to read it for themselves at first, so if you just skip forward about 15 seconds, you'll miss this little bit. So, Cannery Row opens like this. Lee Chong's grocery, while not a model of neatness, was a miracle of supply. It was small and crowded, but within its single room a man could find everything he needed or wanted to live and to be happy. Clothes, food, both fresh and canned, liquor, tobacco, fishing equipment, machinery, boats, cordage, caps, pork chops. You could buy at Lee Chong's a pair of slippers, a silk kimono, a quarter pint of whiskey, and a cigar. You could work out combinations to fit almost any mood. The one commodity Lee Chong did not keep could be had across the lot at Dora's. And that is the opening paragraph to Cannery Row by John Steinbeck. By the way, if you love classics and classic literature and want to gain a deeper appreciation of them and know about the rich array of classics which are out there beyond Jane Austen and the Brontes and Dickens, then hit the subscribe button and smash the like button and follow along on my adventure through the classics, where not only do we read them and I introduce you to some, but we dig deep and analyse some of the themes and motifs. Anyway, let's get back to the book haul. My next book from the book haul is Of Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham. Now, I have never ever read anything by Maugham, and I decided as soon as I saw this that I really must change that state of affairs. Of Human Bondage is classed as Maugham's finest work. Some say it's semi-autobiographical, although Maugham himself denies this. He says there may be some autobiographical features. I mean, what book doesn't have them in many respects? But he says it's a novel. Most of it is pure fiction. Now, the book itself, I'd looked up a bit about its plot, and it's a Bildungsroman. So it starts with a child and works his way through life. In this instance, it's Philip Carre, and at the beginning his mother dies, and he is then transferred to his aunts and uncles. His aunt tries to take care of him, but in that house his uncle is quite coldly disposed towards this child that he has to bring up, which isn't his. Over time he sets forth, they send him to a boarding school, but he has a clubbed foot and he also has a very sensitive disposition. So obviously at a boarding school that's going to bring its troubles and trials amongst his peers. And eventually they decide that he should go to Oxford to study, but he doesn't want to. In this book, from the way I seem to understand what's going to be in here, Philip wants to get the best out of life, to enjoy life. The reason I think that's what it's about is because the title of Human Bondage, that comes from Spinoza's Ethics. I think that's the title of part 4 of his philosophical work. In fact, Maugham was going to call this Beauty from Ashes, but changed it when he considered Spinoza's title. So he's looking at pleasure and pain and happiness in life. Now, Philip Carre doesn't go to Oxford. I know he goes to Heidelberg, so he spends time abroad. And then he spends a while in France, in Paris, trying to be an artist instead of setting up with a doctorate in medicine from the way his uncle wanted him to develop and his headmaster. And he meets a various bunch of people. I know that the way the lives cross, there are people who fall in love and out of love. There's a lot of heartache, obviously being very real to life in general, and that life is not all beauty, but in fact of human bondage. We are subject to our emotions, and humans, one of the things Spinoza was saying in that passage was that humans can't control their emotions, and it leads to disagreeable situations and pain in life. I know Philip Carre will then return to London to study medicine, and it's here that he meets sort of the love of his life. Mildred is her name, and how life progresses with her. She's just a waitress, but he falls madly in love with her, only for her to disappear on him and return and keep going away and coming back into his life. How he tries to fill the void of that love and for life, and to share his life with someone and share its meaning and enjoyment. And it ultimately will wrap up in a way which I'm not going to give away, even though I have read a synopsis of the book. It wraps up in a way that makes him come to a conclusion about the stereotypical way of viewing life that we have. You know, we are born, we're educated, we start to work, we get married, then we die. And what does Philip Carre make of that sort of line of existence? So that's Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham. I'll just read you the opening paragraph. The day broke grey and dull. The clouds hung heavily, and there was a rawness in the air that suggested snow. A woman servant came into a room in which a child was sleeping and drew the curtains. She glanced mechanically at the opposite house, a stucco house with a portico, and went to the child's bed. "Wake up, Philip," she said. Okay. I must admit, I want to know what the house opposite is, and does it stand for anything? So, that was the opening paragraph of Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham. The next book is A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. Now, this book is a sublime novella. It's almost perfection in a book. I class it as a classic, despite the fact it doesn't fulfill one of my personal criteria for what a classic is. But it's so eminently well written and moving, I think it trumps being sort of pigeonholed by any arbitrary determining factors to call a book a classic or not. Interestingly, I might make a video of that. What makes a classic a classic? Leave a comment down below if you'd like me to do a video exploring that idea. What makes a classic a classic? Anyway, this book is just exceptional. The story itself follows a main character called Birkin, that's his surname, who has recently come from the war, World War One, and he's got a job up in Oxfordby in the northern part of Britain. And he's restoring an old painting from the 1500s in a little idyllic church out of the way. And he sleeps in the church. He doesn't shack up with anybody. He's been told that he's getting a certain amount of money, so he's not working to the clock. And he falls in love with the quiet countryside of northern England. As it happens, next door to the church is a field in which there's another man called Moon, again his surname, who's been given the task by a local committee of finding a deceased member of one of the more notable families who, rumour had it, was excommunicated from the church. So Moon's been told, can you find his grave? Birkin and Moon, naturally being so close in proximity in their work, strike up a friendship. Birkin himself has a nervous twitch from shell shock. Moon has also suffered bad experiences in the First World War. And there's just this delightful bond of two men coming from a tragic background which is hardly ever mentioned whatsoever, and just they're enjoying life for a small window of time. Everything is perfect. It's just this one summer in the English countryside which seems to restore heart and life and faith to men who have been horribly damaged and mistreated by the world at large. Like Cannery Row, it does follow a few little vignettes of the characters in the village that Birkin meets with. And, there's a young teenage girl who you can tell has a crush on him. He gets sent to do a sermon for, I think it's the Presbyterian Church, even though he's never preached before, has no idea what to say. But the kindness that's showed to him. And then there's other characters, notably the vicar, Keach, who is awkward and people prejudge him. But the author doesn't seek to redeem him. He just highlights that there are those characters whom people prejudge. Even Birkin and Moon judge him as not the nicest fellow. But he's married to this young girl called Alice Keach, who is beautiful and attractive. And Birkin has this immediate bond from the heart with her and falls in love with her because he's a young man and she's very pretty. But the way it ends, oh my days, the way it ends is just a beautiful miniature portraiture of an experience that you and I have experienced. Every human being will recognise the experience in this book, and it just leaves you... Emily Dickinson, she once described poetry this way. She says, forget about metre and rhyme. She said, when you read a book which at the end leaves you cold, numb, breathless, you know you have read poetry. This is a book that leaves you tingling, breathless, dumbstruck, and sad. But it's a voluptuous sadness, to quote Machado Giassis. What a book. It is only 110 pages long, and I highly recommend that you get hold of this book. It is beautiful. I'll read you the opening paragraph. When the train stopped, I stumbled out, nudging and kicking the kit bag before me. Back down the platform, someone was calling despairingly, Oxgoodby, Oxgoodby. No one offered a hand, so I climbed back into the compartment, stumbling over ankles and feet to get at the fish bass on the rack and my folding camp bed under the seat. If this was a fair sample of northerners, then this was enemy country, so I wasn't too careful where I put my boots. I heard one chap drawing his breath and another grunt. Neither spoke. And that's it. It sounds rather dull at the beginning, but don't let that mislead you. It highlights the narrator's simplistic way of describing, his honest way of describing everything, and how he's lifted from this almost dispassionate character into someone who finds the spark of life again. So, A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr, brilliant book. The next book that I hauled in this month is Our Man in Havana by Greene. Now, Graham Greene is a phenomenal writer, very good at satire and lampooning people, but also an ability to grip you and drag you through a novel in excitement, sort of breathless excitement. In this story, he takes aim at MI6 back in the 60s. This was a year or two before the Cuban Missile Crisis, so under General Batista's regime in Cuba, and he lampoons the British intelligence service willingness to believe local informants, which, when you consider that they paid the local informants, well, they were always going to feed information, weren't they? Otherwise, they'd lose money. And that's what Graham Greene takes up in Our Man in Havana. He has a character called Wormold, who is no more than a vacuum cleaner salesman. His wife has died, I think, or left him, and he has a young 16-year-old daughter who, although devoutly religious, is very manipulative and highly materialistic. She can spend for the whole country, kind of thing. So he's trying to bring enough money in to pay his own way and to support his daughter, who just keeps spending. And so when he's met by a British agent who says, his name's Hawthorne, he says, I'll pay you to be an informant for us, to feed information back as part of our spy network. Wormold thinks, well, it's a way to get some extra money. But what happens is just farcical and yet dramatic, because Wormold begins to make up reports and feed them to Hawthorne and feed them back to London. And he just starts using the newspaper, taking bits of information out of that to make it sound plausible and picking some names, making some names up, other names are real. And he makes up a whole network of baddies and spies and all this kind of stuff and feeds it on to the British intelligence service. Now, Hawthorne himself, his handler, is a bit dubious about some of the details. However, MI6 back home are more than happy to believe what Wormold is feeding them. And he even draws a picture of a secret factory in the mountains built by the regime. And he draws it out of sort of small miniature vacuum cleaner parts. And the British Secret Service think, this is the man we need to really put some more of our resources into. So they appoint Wormold a secretary and send someone over with him, and she wants to meet these informants that he's got and these spies that he knows. Of course, he's made it all up. And so he has to think of an elaborate way to get himself out of a pickle. As it happens, the people whom he's made up, characters by their name in the real world, begin to die. It starts with a guy called Raoul, who dies in a car accident just before he's meant to introduce this Raoul to the woman who's come to stay with him. And then more of the characters that he's made up, people with those names, begin dying. And so he has to set out with his assistant to start saving people whose names he has written down that are mysteriously dying, even though he knows they're false. And that's the idea behind the whole book. I mean, how wonderful is that for not only lampooning the infrastructure of MI6, but also for just sheer imagination, brilliance, and dark comedy, I suppose. However, there is one thing you will want to know about this book. It unfortunately does contain some racial epithets, which obviously are very disagreeable nowadays, but it's sort of, some would say it's the world it was written in, and it shows the rough and coarse nature of the environment that Wormold finds himself. However, if you still read it, you could mark those things out and insert a different word in its place for future reading. So I thought I'd just give you a heads up on that. The next book is Vile Bodies by Evelyn Waugh. Now, Waugh is a superb writer, like superb. The irony and the humour and the caustic wit that Waugh embeds into his writing is just something else. Vile Bodies is one of Waugh's most famous works. Now, it focuses on the young set in the 1920s. If you take up a bit of history, You'll recognise that the Great War has just taken place, and men were sent to the front lines where they were just mown down, lived in awful conditions, they had been betrayed by the establishment, and there was sort of a revolt in the way of society's thinking. Life was short. What was the point in living the standard old life of Victorian England pre-World War I when life could be so short? No, it was time to invest in your energies in pleasure and in fun and exploration and extracting the juices out of life. And based in that society, Waugh talks about the young set and their vile bodies, because they engaged their intelligence and their passions and their desires in a ceaseless quest for more pleasure and more ways to titillate themselves. Now, I don't know how this all works out because I've never read this particular work of Evelyn Waugh, so I am particularly looking forward to it because I know Waugh is a treat to read. I'll read you what it says on the back. It says, in the years following the First World War, a new generation emerges, wistful and vulnerable beneath the glitter. The bright young things of 20s Mayfair, with their paradoxical mix of innocence and sophistication, exercise their inventive minds and vile bodies in every kind of capricious escapade. In a quest for treasure, a favourite party occupation, a vivid assortment of characters hunt fast and furiously for ever greater sensations and the fulfilment of unconscious desires. So that's what it says on the back. I'll just read you the first paragraph of the book to give you a sense of Waugh's style. It was clearly going to be a bad crossing. With Asiatic resignation, Father Rothschild, S.J., put down his suitcase in the corner of the bar and went on deck. It was a small suitcase of imitation crocodile hide. The initials stamped on it in Gothic characters were not Father Rothschild's, for he had borrowed it that morning from the valet de chambre of his hotel. It contained some rudimentary underclothes, 6 important new books in 6 languages, a false beard, and a school atlas and gazetteer heavily annotated. Standing on the deck, Father Rothschild leant his elbows on the rail, rested his chin in his hands, and surveyed the procession of passengers coming up the gangway, each face eloquent of polite misgiving. That is delicious writing. It makes me just want to carry on reading straight through the book without pause for coffee, tea, brunch, or sleep. So that was our next book, Vile Bodies, Evelyn Waugh. The final book in my book haul for this month is one of 2 books which totally revolutionised writing about the spy genre. But this one is particularly good on its social commentary, or so I've been led to believe, and that is Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy by John le Carre. Of course, the other book that revolutionised the spy genre was The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. But this book is what many acclaim to be the masterpiece of the spy genre in its depth of intricacy and style and form of writing. The book itself follows Smiley, again, the main character, the main agent in most of le Carre's novels. Now, Smiley, thanks to a previous operation in Czechoslovakia, which went horribly wrong, Operation Testify, Smiley has now been put out of the service. He's no longer in control, or part of the circus, as it's called. But it's believed now that someone in a very high-ranking position within control, within the British Secret Service, is actually a long-standing Soviet mole. But they don't know how to find out who it is. So they set up a scheme where one of their characters, one of their agents, can quickly report back who it is if it should be found out. And they give each member a code name. And it comes from the old children's nursery rhyme, which says, Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Sailor, Rich Man, Poor Man, Beggar Man, Thief. And that's where we get the theme from. Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy. Now, who can head up an investigation like this when you're not sure who at the top is actually a mole? Smiley and some of his compatriots are above suspicion because they've been demoted or retired in the service. And so they approach Smiley again and ask him to head up this operation. Of course, he's reticent, who wouldn't be, but he realises that it must be done. There then follows the story, which, to be honest, I have no idea what happens. All I know is it's hailed as sublime literature. It's more than just a fanciful escapade. It's the perfect form of writing for its genre. So, although not a genre that's known for deep and meaningful comments on life, apparently Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy does give a social insight, but it's the level at which it's written. It stands as a keystone or the signal flag for which all other aspiring great authors in the genre should aim at. So there's my last one, Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy by John le Carre. Well, I hope you've enjoyed my book haul for this month. Leave in the comments below any of the books that you've already read and what you thought of them, or perhaps there's some in this list which you've heard of before and intended to read but forgotten about. Which ones are they? Are there any favourite authors amongst them for any of you, my beloved subscribers? Well, I hope you have enjoyed this episode of Tristan and the Classics. Remember to hit the subscribe and smash the like button, and I wish you joy in your reading.